Well, as the DA embarks on a dramatic weekend to find an interim leader, editorial contributor Karyn Maughan sat down with the man considered to be a front-runner, John Steenhuisen, to unpack his understanding and interpretation of the political landscape that lies ahead.
And I think that you would agree with me that the vast majority of people who are living in the conditions that you described are black. So why then is there this position, particularly vocalized by your newly elected federal council leader, Helen Zille, that race cannot be a proxy for disadvantage? Surely in South Africa, 300 years of colonialism, apartheid, structured discrimination, that's quite a strange position to adopt and to express so vocally in the context of South Africa.
Well, of course, and you've got to, race is an issue in South Africa, and I don't think anyone can deny the fact that race is an issue. It absolutely is. But I think that if you look at our party's philosophy, we're a liberal party that believes in non-racialism, and that you don't address the scars and damage of that racial policies have caused by adding on and layering more racial policies. So, for instance, let's look at poverty in South Africa. According to Stats SA, 99.89% of South Africans who fall below the definition of poverty are black South Africans. So you don't need race to be a proxy for poverty in South Africa. You can use poverty as the direct proxy for disadvantage. And the problem with racially based policies, like the ANC's version of BBBEE and affirmative action, is that who you catch in the net are not necessarily the people who should be the beneficiaries. Surely who you want to benefit from those policies are the 99.8% of black South Africans who remain trapped in poverty and out of opportunity. But what you're capturing in the net of the ANC's conception of these, using race as the proxy for disadvantage, are the Guptas, who are beneficiaries of BBBEE, the same self-reinforcing elite who keep being empowered deal after deal, while the broad swathe of black, poor South Africans remain trapped out of the race-based politics and policies have not worked to address the problem of black poverty and black disadvantage in South Africa. And they never will, because you don't resolve the problems created by race-based policies by simply layering over more race-based policies.
So if you take affirmative action and you take BEE off the table, which is essentially what you're saying needs to happen, what is the solution then? Because clearly we are the most unequal country in the world. We're on the cover of Time magazine, those visuals of a Cape Town divided, shacks on one side, luxury houses on the other. This is the city in which we now sit. So what is the solution then?
Well,
what is the DA saying will actually start to redress the deeply structured inequalities caused by apartheid, caused by colonialism, which still permeate our society today and affect black people?
Sure, of course. And again, the policies that you put in place to deal with these problems don't need to have a racial classification, because there is no legal definition in South Africa for who is black and who is not black. And you don't need to resort to pencil tests if you want to determine who is disadvantaged, where that inequality exists. So, for instance, if you have a policy that targets poor South Africans, if you target homeless South Africans, if you target students who are locked out of opportunity, the majority of them will be black South Africans. So what happens if you, out of that 99.9% of black South Africans, you catch 30,000 white South Africans in the net? Is it such a bad thing? Do we resolve a problem of poor quality education in an impoverished area by building a state-of-the-art school and then putting up a sign outside that says blacks only? I think if you start to re-racialize policies like that, you start to take the country back to the very problems that got us into the situation that we're in here at the moment. So we're saying don't ignore race. Of course race is important in South Africa, but rather focus the proxy for disadvantage as disadvantage and poverty, because then you can address the root cause. You're not then reinforcing and re-empowering the 6 million members of the black middle class and stuff. You're focusing policies on poor people who are locked out of opportunity, who need it the most, not people who keep being enriched deal after deal.
So what is your alternative to BEE and affirmative action?
Well, we use, and we're going to be going to a policy conference in January, and I think that's very important because the party's got to come up with these alternatives. But I think we've got to start moving, my personal views, we've got to start moving away from the ANC's conceptions of race-based policies, because they have failed. They've failed black South Africans. 10% poorer, more growing unemployment queues, less opportunity. They're not working. And so what we're going to be doing in January is sitting together as a party and come up with a coherent package of empowerment policies that we believe will be far more targeted and far more broad-based to be able to lift poor people in South Africa out of poverty into opportunity and to give them an equality of opportunity that they need to be able to drive the country and themselves and their personal aspirations forward.
So, I mean, I think the difficulty is this. I think that at this point, all South Africans are seeing, and of course this is on the very kind of intense landscape of a social media forum like Twitter, is that the DA is simply saying, affirmative action, BE off the table, race can't be a proxy for disadvantage. In the context of, the colonialism tweets by Helen Zille, in the context of all that, in the context of Musi Maimane walking away from the party, Herman Mashaba, there's a kind of impression that's being created that the DA is unwilling to deal with the issue of structural redress linked to race. And why I keep pushing you on this issue of what's your alternative is that in the vacuum of saying, well, we're actually going to do this is our idea, it seems that you're just very, very defensive about preserving kind of white privilege and white positions. You know what I'm saying?
No, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it's a fair analysis of the situation at all. I think that the policies, the inequality that exists is still there 3 decades after the end of apartheid. The poverty is still there 3 decades after the end of apartheid. Clearly, there is a policy vacuum because the policies of the ANC aren't working. And what we're saying is that we believe you need to move away from using race as the criteria, but focus on disadvantage and poverty. Because if you do that, so I said, the statistics are there. They're not. It's not something we're making up. It's stats that say out there. 99.9% of the beneficiaries of those policies, no matter what they are, to address structural inequality, to address income inequality, to address spatial inequality, all of those policies, if you target them at where the need really is, instead of creating this false paradigm that a race-based policy is going to help every black person in South Africa, that you're able to then be able to develop a far more progressive, targeted program, which of course the far majority, by far, will be black South Africans. So we're not, for instance, saying, race doesn't matter in South Africa and we must just forget centuries of dispossession, the legislative dispossession. You've got to have redress in South Africa, and you do that in a tolerant land reform. Is a good way of showing how you can have redress policies that target people. It wasn't white South Africans who had land stolen from them under the apartheid government or who were subject to brutalized forced removals. So if you say, were you a victim of forced removal under the apartheid government, of course 99.9% of those people are going to be black, Indian or coloured South Africans. So you don't have to resort to the crude policies of racial profiling of South Africans, which got us into the problem we're in today. It's the reason we have inequality and people who are being displaced, because crude race-based policies got us here. You don't fix those problems by just layering more crude race-based policies over them. It's not going to take South Africa forward. We've had 3 decades of them. They haven't worked. We've got to do something more modern and progressive as a country if we're going to lift black South Africans out of the situation we're in, get them onto the opportunity ladder, and be giving them an equal shot to be able to move forward.
What do you think the return of Helen Zille to such a crucial leadership position within the DA will do for this party?
Well, look, I think that a lot of people completely misread the situation, first of all, and then secondly, apportion powers to Helen which are far beyond the office. So first of all, I think the point to make is we're a democratic organization. We're a party of open opportunity, so anybody can stand for any position in the party. And I think people lose sight of the fact that Helen won a 4-way contest in the party and was elected by a federal council, majority of delegates who were not white South Africans. And the people looked at the position and felt who was the most competent person for the job, and she won. Secondly, an individual in the party cannot single-handedly determine the policy direction, the messaging of the party. It's done by the broader leadership of the party. And I think if you look at the federal executive of the party, there's a very diverse group of people, 8 of the 9 provincial leaders, black South Africans, national spokespersons, head of our ancillary units. It is a very diverse group of people, and that is how decisions are made in the DA. It's not Helen Zille waking up one morning and deciding this is the path we're going to go on to. And I think that people misunderstand that in South Africa, that the DA is a party of big principles and big values, not big personalities. And that one person cannot just simply tear the party into a particular direction.
Well, I mean, she gets elected to the position. You do see the exit of Herman Mashaba in a very public way, of Musi Maimane in a very public way. This is someone who, I know she's currently contesting a ruling which is, that supported the public protector's finding that she was guilty of hate speech because of the colonialism tweets. And obviously that's a matter of quite fierce legal debate. But this is someone who is a very strong personality and sometimes, arguably, displays a degree of insensitivity to the realities of black South Africans. I don't want to be a spokesperson for them because I'm a white privileged woman, and how would I know? But, you can see by the reaction that she gets that oftentimes her remarks are interpreted as really deeply hurtful, deeply offensive. I mean, is that not an issue that needs to be addressed, that there needs to be a greater... I mean, can you as a party say to her, listen, stay off the Twitter, or is this someone that you're just going to allow to just do whatever she wants?
Well, look, I mean, obviously, I don't agree with everything Helen says, and I happen to disagree with the format and the manner in which the tweet was disseminated. But we're a party of liberals and believe people should have an opportunity to have freedom of speech and to be able to do that. But I would make this point, that Helen is one of the leaders which we got the most number of votes from black South Africans under. And if you look at the review panel report that came out, the tables in there show that very, very clearly, that the party advanced significantly in particularly black communities under Helen's leadership. I think if one looks at Helen's past, I think she's done a lot more for the liberation of black South Africans, her role in the struggle during the exposing the Biko matter under very difficult circumstances, than some of the people who today proclaim themselves as the vanguards of the struggle. So I think you've got to look at someone's whole career and not just simply one incident in it. But I also would make this point, that Maimane's departure was as a result of a report which he himself commissioned. He chose the 3 commissioners who conducted the report himself. He wrote the terms of reference for that report himself. And, as a party, when we ask for these reports, we hold our leadership accountable. And I think that accountability should be welcomed in the South African political context, because if we're willing to hold ourselves accountable as a party, it means we're willing to hold ourselves accountable wherever we may govern.
Your contender in the race for interim leadership of the DA, Makashule Ghana, has put out a piece where he's really looked very long and hard at what's happened to the DA in the recent history and your loss in the elections. And one of the things that he says is the DA is somewhat incoherent because it preaches this rhetoric of non-racialism, but at the same time seems to believe that in order to succeed at elections, it needs black leaders. I mean, what do you make of that kind of argument? Because that's going to affect you directly. You are a white man putting up his hand for leadership of a party, which seems to acknowledge that in order to grow, it may actually need black leadership.
Well, I don't think that is true, and I don't think it's borne out by, again, the figures. If you look at the biggest growth in black communities was under Tony Leon and under Helen Zille. I think we went backwards in the last election under a black leader, which I think shows that the race of who is leading the party is less important than the values and principles the party is espousing and the message that the party is sending out to communities. Now, I can't choose what colour I'm born. That's not a choice I have. But I can choose what I do every single day in the fight against poverty, inequality and injustice. And I've spent a large part of my career focusing on those issues, trying to make South Africa a better place for all South Africans. I fundamentally disagree with Mr. Ghana on the fact that you need to be a black leader to win black votes. I think that given the desperate situation that South Africa finds itself in, over 10 million people unemployed, children locked out of the economy by an education system which fails them every single day. People are desperate for hope and opportunity and some hand up to be able to get on in life and to make life better for themselves. I don't think they're interested in the colour of the person who's delivering that message. They're interested in what the message is. And that's, I know there's a challenge. Of course it's a challenge. But I think we've got to move away from the situation that in South Africa you're judged by the colour of your skin. Judge people by their contribution, what they say, what they do, and what they can achieve on behalf of you. You don't need to be a black, poor South African living on the streets in an informal settlement to be able to take up those people's plight every single day in the work that you do. I think Helen Zille showed you don't need to be a political prisoner on Robben Island to stand up for those political prisoners on Robben Island. And that's the message I say to South Africa. Judge me on what I can do. I've put up my hand. I'm offering to pitch in and do what I can do to make South Africa better, to address inequality, to lift people out of poverty, and to provide opportunity. Judge me on what I can do, not on whether I have a certain tone of pigmentation. Because if we do that, then I can tell you we're back in the 1980s, where we're judging people on the colour of their skin and not on merit. And that undermines the constitutional view that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. And we're going to need the best of everybody in South Africa if we're going to get this country out of this difficult position and put us onto a path of prosperity and hope for the future, rather than on the path of despair that we're currently on.
Okay, my last question to you, and I know you've given me a lot of time, and I appreciate that. The unfortunate reality is that, white people are systemically advantaged. I know there's a debate within your party about white privilege, etc., etc. But for many people, and this has been something that's has been thrown at you, is going to be thrown at you in the future, is this issue of you not having a qualification, only having a matric. And it's seen as this is a demonstration, and I know you faced this before and you've dealt with it, of basically the uprising of white male mediocrity. That if you were a black person in this position, you would require qualifications, you would require a number of things. The fact that you're even here is a demonstration of white privilege. So, for you to talk, I mean, what do you say to people who say things like that to you?
Well, I think it's I've worked hard for every single position I've got. I was a branch member of this party. I've delivered pamphlets for this party on my bicycle when I was still at school. I've served as a councillor for 10 years. I've done the hard yards that have earned my position here. Wasn't parachuted into a position 4 years ago and said, well, here we go, you lead the DA because you look a certain way, you sound a certain way. I've come up through the ranks of this party. I've worked hard for everything I've got. And, the fact that I've got a matric, I love it when people like the EFF make that an issue. Over 88% of South Africans only have a matric. Are you saying to them that so far and no further, your aspirations for your future are now cut off because you don't have a qualification? We don't have a qualified franchise in South Africa. Every South African must be judged on their contribution and what they can bring. And I can tell you, the people whose life savings, those pensioners, were stolen in the VBS bank scandal, sleep no better at night knowing that the perpetrators of that crime had PhDs and master's degrees. And that is the point. You don't need a qualification to serve, and serve well and honestly in this country. And that's the beauty of our democracy.
Thank you very much, John Steenhuisen.
Thank you.